For 2,000 years, the official biography of Jesus of Nazareth has been told through exactly 4 perspectives: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Every sermon, every piece of classic art, and every historical assumption about his life was built on that strict 4-book foundation. In December 1945, an Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer in the desert near the town of Nag Hammadi. His mattock suddenly struck something hard, a sealed, meter-tall clay jar buried deep in the sand. Fearing cursed spirits, but hoping for gold, he smashed it open. Inside, he didn't find coins. He found 13 papyrus books bound in heavy, weathered animal leather and sealed tightly with leather straps. Pulling those decaying books from the dirt instantly broke the historical monopoly on one of the world's most guarded religious narratives. It took years for international scholars to get their hands on the codices, but when they finally decoded the ancient text, they realized what they had. These were lost gospels, supposed first-hand accounts of Jesus that the world hadn't seen for millennia, and the contents were bizarre. Instead of focusing on sin and crucifixion, these writings described a mystical teacher who offered inner enlightenment, directly contradicting the standard New Testament. Scholars identified the authors as Gnostics, a diverse group of early believers whose name literally translates to "those who know." They believed salvation came not through faith in a church hierarchy, but through uncovering secret internal wisdom. This expansive library of texts raised 2 immediate questions. How did a parallel tradition of this scale even exist? And who went to such extreme lengths to hide it under the rocks? The existence of these books reveals a deliberate 2,000-year void in the accepted story of early Christianity. The journey of these texts from the dirt to the laboratory was nearly disastrous. After the discovery, the manuscripts were broken apart, traded for pennies, and scattered across the chaotic antiquities black market of mid-century Cairo. A frantic scramble followed. Scholars and antiquities dealers raced across Egypt, trying desperately to intercept and purchase the loose, fragile pages before they deteriorated or disappeared into private collections forever. As the texts were slowly and painstakingly reconstructed, translators unearthed highly controversial, long-rumored works, including the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary. Translating these specific fragments proved that the original followers of Jesus were not operating as a unified, monolithic group. They were deeply fractured and highly argumentative. If you trace the timeline back to the 2nd century, the popular myth of a single, harmonious early church completely falls apart. Early Christianity was essentially an unregulated marketplace of ideas. Different communities scattered around the Mediterranean had entirely different texts, different rituals, and fiercely competing visions of who Jesus actually was. This diagram shows how that early network splintered. From the central figure of Jesus, you see traditional, orthodox paths branching off that focus on his physical crucifixion for the forgiveness of sins. But completely separate from those, you have these distinct Gnostic branches, where the focus shifts entirely to escaping the physical world through hidden, mystical knowledge. In those early centuries, there was no centralized pope, no official Bible, and no strict definition of heresy. It was a centuries-long, unresolved competition for the survival of their specific beliefs. That open competition ended abruptly in the 4th century. When the Roman Empire formally adopted Christianity, the state required a singular, unified belief system to help govern a sprawling, fractured population. Church leaders held councils to establish a strict official canon. They selected Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and formally condemned the dozens of other Gospels in circulation as dangerous falsehoods. The newly empowered church leadership then issued a severe mandate across the empire, ordering the aggressive confiscation and destruction of all unapproved competing texts, especially those written by the Gnostics. In southern Egypt, monks living in the shadow of these desert cliffs received the purge order. Rather than throwing their sacred ancestral library into the fire, they packed the leather-bound books into a sealed jar and buried them under the rocks. State-sponsored political purges buried these books for 2,000 years in intentional effort to enforce religious uniformity. Pulling these texts out of the sand today doesn't automatically debunk the traditional Bible. It does, however, force us to look at it through an entirely different lens. Looking at this visual filter, we can see the reality of how the New Testament was formed. Out of dozens of diverse, ancient documents attempting to pass through the strict ideological barrier of the Roman Church, only 4 specific texts made it through. The Bible we know today is a highly curated anthology, the surviving literature of a brutal ancient culture war. The surviving papyrus from Nag Hammadi restores a physical voice to a community that lost that war and was systematically erased from history. Behind the unfamiliar Coptic script and the decaying ink are the actual thoughts of individuals who believed they alone grasped the divine. Their discovery proves that the ancient historical record is fiercely contested. The foundations of our largest institutions are rarely as simple as the official timeline suggests, and the history we inherit is simply the version written by the victors.